Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Crowthorne, and I've been protecting these West Virginia mountains for 16 years now. Before that, I spent 12 years down in the coal mines, breathing dust and praying the ceiling wouldn't come down on my head. 3 times it almost did. That's why I became a park ranger specializing in abandoned mine safety. I know what those dark holes in the ground can do to a man. People think I'm crazy when I tell them what I saw in March of 1987. They say mine gases make you see things that aren't there. Carbon monoxide poisoning, they call it. Makes perfect sense, except for one small problem. I had all the right equipment and the air was clean. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. It was the coldest March anyone could remember. Ice storms had been hitting the Monongahela National Forest for 3 straight days, making the abandoned mining roads slick as glass. I was sitting in my ranger station drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil when the call came in. "Sam, we got 3 bodies up at the old Black Rock mine," Sheriff Hayes said through the static. "Young folks from the city, looks like. Need you to check if it's gas poisoning before we bring them out." I knew Black Rock well. The mine had been sealed since 1952 after a cave-in killed 47 men. They never got the bodies out, just filled in the main entrance with concrete and left those poor souls down there. Over the years, kids would find ways in through old air shafts or forgotten side tunnels. Most came out with nothing worse than scraped knees and a good scare, but not these 3. The drive up took me 2 hours on roads that hadn't seen maintenance since the mine closed. My truck slipped and slid through the ice, headlights cutting through fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The whole forest felt wrong somehow, too quiet. Even the crows had stopped, kept calling. I found the sheriff's cars parked near what used to be the main entrance. Yellow tape fluttered in the wind like prayer flags. Hayes met me at the tree line, his face grim under his hat. "They're down about 50 feet, he said, handing me a flashlight. "Coroner can't get in until you clear the air. You sure that equipment of yours works right?" I patted the gas detector clipped to my belt. "This little box has saved my life more times than I can count. If there's bad air down there, it'll scream loud enough to wake the dead." Hayes winced at my choice of words, but I didn't think much of it then. The entrance they'd used was a crack in the rocks about 3 feet wide, some old air shaft that the company had missed when they sealed everything up. My flashlight beam disappeared into the darkness like it was being swallowed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment I squeezed through. Underground, the silence was different, heavier, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. My boots crunched on loose gravel as I followed the tunnel deeper. The walls were carved from solid rock, black with coal dust that had been there for 35 years. But something was strange. The dust looked fresh somehow, like it had been disturbed recently. My gas detector stayed quiet. No beeping, no warnings, just clean air, which made what I found even more confusing. The 3 young people were huddled together in a small chamber about 50 feet from the entrance. 2 boys and a girl, maybe college age. They had camping gear, expensive flashlights, one of those cameras that takes instant pictures. Urban explorers, probably. The kind who thought abandoned places were fun to visit. But they died with looks of pure terror on their faces. Eyes wide, mouths open like they were screaming. Their skin was cherry red, classic sign of carbon monoxide poisoning, except my detector showed normal air. I checked twice, then 3 times. The readings didn't change. Whatever killed them, it wasn't gas. That's when I noticed their positions. They weren't slumped over like people who'd just fallen asleep and never woken up. They were pressed against the far wall of the chamber, hands up like they were trying to push something away. Like they'd died running from something that had cornered them. I was about to head back up and report to Hayes when I heard it. A sound that made my blood turn to ice water. Someone was singing. Deep in the mine, farther than any living person should be, a man's voice was singing an old hymn. Swing low, sweet chariot. The words echoed off the tunnel walls, getting louder as whoever was singing came closer. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall. In the complete darkness, I could see a faint glow moving toward me. Not electric light. Something else. Something that flickered and danced like a candle flame. The singing got closer and closer. I could make out words now, sung in a voice rough from years of breathing coal dust. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. My hand found the radio on my belt. I keyed the mic and whispered, "Hayes, there's someone else down here." Static. Then Hayes's voice, confused. "Sam, you're breaking up. Sounds like there's someone singing in the background. You got the radio on?" The glow was maybe 20 feet away now. I could see it was coming from around a bend in the tunnel. But as I watched, frozen with fear, I realized something impossible. The tunnel didn't bend. It was a straight shot from where I stood to the sealed entrance 50 feet behind me. There was nowhere for that light to be coming from. The singing stopped. In the silence, I heard footsteps. Heavy boots on stone, getting closer. Then a voice, different from the singer, called out, "Hey there, friend. You lost?" I wanted to run. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of that mine. But I'm a professional. I've been in dangerous situations before. I clicked my flashlight back on and called out, "Park Service, who's down here?" The beam of my light hit nothing but empty tunnel. No person, no glow, just black rock and coal dust. But the air had changed. It felt thick now, hard to breathe, and cold. So cold I could see my breath. My gas detector finally started beeping. I got out of that mine faster than I'd moved in years. My equipment was going crazy. Carbon monoxide levels spiking, then dropping, then spiking again. Like something was playing games with the air itself. Hayes was waiting at the entrance, stamping his feet in the cold. "What's the story, Sam?" "Air's bad," I lied. "Real bad. We'll need breathing gear to get those bodies out." It wasn't really a lie. Something down there was definitely making the air dangerous. I just wasn't sure it was anything my equipment was designed to detect. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that voice. "Hey there, friend. You lost?" The tone had been friendly enough, but there was something underneath it, something hungry. I did some research at the library the next morning. The Black Rock mine disaster was front-page news in 1952. 47 men killed when the main tunnel collapsed during the night shift. What made it worse was that the company had known the supports were failing. Internal memos showed they'd postponed repairs to avoid shutting down production. But there was something else in the old newspaper articles. Something the official reports had left out. Families claimed their dead relatives had been appearing around town, knocking on doors at night, asking for help, always covered in coal dust, always carrying their mining tools. The stories stopped after about a month. People said the ghosts had given up and moved on, but reading between the lines, I got a different impression. The stories stopped because people stopped talking about them, and because they were too scared. I called Jerry Blackwood, the state mine inspector, that afternoon. Jerry and I went way back. He'd been the one who'd pulled me out of my last cave-in back in '74. "Sam, you sound rattled," he said when I explained what I'd found. "You sure your equipment's working right?" "Jerry, I've been using gas detectors for 20 years. This isn't equipment failure. There's something else going on in that mine." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll drive up tomorrow. We'll check it out together." Jerry arrived the next morning with a van full of professional mining equipment. Air samplers, structural sensors, even some kind of ground-penetrating radar. If there was a scientific explanation for what I'd experienced, we'd find it. We suited up with full breathing gear and portable air supplies. No taking chances this time. The crack in the rocks seemed smaller in daylight, like the mountain was trying to close itself up. "Jesus, it's cold down here," Jerry said through his mask as we squeezed through the entrance. His breath was already fogging up his faceplate. The tunnel looked different than it had the day before. The walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. And there were things that hadn't been there. Old mining equipment scattered along the passage. Pickaxes, shovels, metal buckets, all covered in coal dust. But underneath the dust, They looked new. "Sam, look at this," Jerry said, kneeling next to an overturned bucket. "This isn't 35 years old. Paint's still fresh under all this coal." He was right. The equipment looked like it had been manufactured yesterday, and then somehow aged with decades of dust in a matter of hours. We found the 3 bodies exactly where I'd left them. Jerry took pictures while I collected air samples. Everything was normal. No toxic gases, no structural dangers. Just 3 dead kids, and a growing sense that we were being watched. That's when Jerry's radar unit started acting up. The screen was showing something impossible. Empty spaces behind the walls were solid rock chutes, chambers and tunnels that weren't on any of the old mine maps. "This doesn't make sense," Jerry muttered, adjusting the settings. "According to this, there's a whole network of tunnels behind this wall. But the geological surveys show solid limestone." I pressed my ear to the rock where his device was showing empty space. From inside the wall, faint but clear, I could hear the sound of pickaxes hitting stone. "Jerry," I said quietly, "someone's working in there." He put his own ear to the wall. His face went white behind his mask. "That's impossible. This whole section was sealed. Even if someone had gotten in, they'd need air, lights, equipment." The sound stopped suddenly. Then, from right behind the wall came a voice. "Who's that listening? You boys here to help us dig?" Jerry stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his equipment. The voice was muffled by rock and distance, but clear enough to understand, and it sounded like it was coming from more than one person. A chorus of men, all talking at once. "Been working this shift for 35 years. Can't find the way out. Boss man said we gotta keep digging. You boys here to help us dig?" My radio crackled to life. Hayes's voice, distorted by static. "Sam, you reading me? Got reports of equipment running up at the old mine. Heavy machinery. Thought you said the place was sealed up tight." I keyed the mic with shaking hands. "Hayes, there's no machinery up here. We're the only ones." The sound hit us like a freight train. From somewhere deeper in the mine came the roar of industrial equipment. Conveyor belts, air compressors, the rattle and bang of a working mine in full operation. The noise was so loud it made our teeth ache, even through our hearing protection. But there were no lights, no electrical lines, no way for any of that equipment to be running. Jerry grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." As we turned to leave, my flashlight beam swept across the wall where we'd heard the voices. There, scratched into the rock in fresh white marks, were words that hadn't been there when we'd arrived. Shift change, 6 p.m. I checked my watch, 5:45 p.m. "Jerry, run." We made it about halfway to the entrance when the singing started again. But this time it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens of voices, all singing the same hymn we'd heard before. "Swing low, sweet chariot." The sound was coming from behind us, getting closer with every step we took. The temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in thick clouds that hung in the air like fog. Ice began forming on the tunnel walls, crackling and popping as it spread. "Don't look back," I told Jerry, but he was already turning around. He screamed. Coming down the tunnel behind us, maybe 20 feet away, was a line of men in mining gear. Hard hats with carbide lamps, canvas work clothes, heavy boots. All covered in coal dust, so thick their faces were just pale shapes in the darkness. They were singing and walking in perfect formation, like they were marching to work. In their hands they carried the tools of their trade: picks, shovels, lunch buckets. Some had coils of rope. Others pushed small mining cars that squeaked and rattled on invisible rails. The one in front, a tall man with a thick mustache, tipped his hat to us politely. "Evening, boys," he said in a voice that echoed strangely. "You here for the shift change? We could use some help. Been working the same seam for 35 years and we still ain't hit our quota." Jerry was hyperventilating inside his mask. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the entrance, but our legs felt like they were moving through molasses. The air had gotten thick, almost liquid. Behind us, the miners kept walking, kept singing. Their carbide lamps cast dancing shadows on the tunnel walls, but the shadows moved wrong. Instead of following the men who cast them, they seemed to be reaching toward us. "Don't mean to be unfriendly," the tall miner called. "Out!" his voice getting closer even though we were running. "Just that we got work to do. Been waiting a long time for some fresh help." We burst through the crack in the rocks and into daylight that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness of the mine. Jerry collapsed on the ground, gasping and shaking. Behind us, the singing continued for another few minutes before slowly fading away. But the cold stayed with us. Even in the afternoon sun, we couldn't get warm. "Sam," Jerry said when he finally caught his breath, "we can't tell anyone about this. They'll think we're crazy." I looked back at the crack in the rocks. For just a moment, I could swear I saw a faint glow deep inside, and I could smell something that hadn't been there before. Coal dust and sweat and something else. Something like death. "We have to go back," I said. "Those 3 kids, I don't think they died from gas poisoning." Jerry stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Go back?" "Sam, whatever those things were, they wanted us to stay. They wanted us to join them." He was right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if we didn't figure out what was happening in that mine, those 3 dead kids wouldn't be the last. As we packed up our equipment, I heard it one more time. Faint, but clear. "See you boys tomorrow. Same shift, same time." And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that tomorrow would come whether we wanted it to or not. I didn't sleep that night either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those miners walking toward us in perfect formation, the way they'd moved like they were following rails we couldn't see, the way they'd talked about quotas and shift changes like they were still living in 1952. Jerry called me at dawn. "Sam, I've been thinking about what we saw. I found something." He met me at the library with a box of old company records he'd gotten from the state archives. Black Rock Mining Company had gone out of business in 1953, just months after the disaster. But the paperwork Jerry had found told a different story than the newspapers. "Look at this," he said, spreading employment contracts across the table. "Every miner who died in that cave-in had signed one of these. Look at the language." I read over his shoulder. Most of it was standard legal stuff, but one section stood out. "Employee agrees to fulfill assigned duties until such time as company management formally releases employee from obligation, regardless of circumstances that may arise during completion of said duties." "That's weird wording," I said. "But it's just corporate lawyer talk." Jerry shook his head. "No, look closer. See this line here? Regardless of circumstances. And this part about formal release from obligation. Sam, what if those men think they're still under contract? What if they can't leave until someone officially ends their shift?" It sounded crazy, but it was the first explanation that made any sense. "So what do we do? Tell them their shift is over?" "I don't know, but there's something else." He pulled out a folder thick with police reports. "I requested records on all the missing persons cases in this area since 1952. Take a look." The numbers were disturbing. Every few years someone would disappear near the old mine. Hikers, hunters, teenagers looking for a place to party. Sometimes their cars were found abandoned on the mining roads. Sometimes they just vanished completely. But what really caught my attention were the witness reports. People claimed to see lights in the sealed mine. Others reported hearing machinery running at night. A few mentioned seeing men in old-fashioned mining gear walking along the abandoned roads after dark. "Jerry, how many people do you think have gone missing up there?" He counted through the files. "Official count, maybe 15 over 35 years. But if you count the ones where people just disappeared without a trace, could be twice that. 30 people, maybe more. All vanished, near a mine where 47 men had died and never been properly buried." "We have to go back," I said. "Are you insane?" "Sam, those things tried to recruit us yesterday. They wanted us to stay for the shift change. That's exactly why we have to go back. If they're still following their work schedule from 1952, then they're predictable. We can figure out when they're active and when they're resting." Jerry looked at me like I'd suggested we jump off a cliff. But I could see he was thinking about it. We both knew that if we didn't do something, more people would die. We spent the rest of the morning planning. If the miners were following their old work schedule, they'd be most active during shift changes, 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. The safest time to explore would be mid-morning or mid-afternoon, when they should be working deeper in the mine. At 1 p.m., we drove back up to Black Rock with enough equipment to outfit a small army. Portable lights, recording devices, structural sensors, and a few things Jerry had borrowed from the mining museum. Vintage equipment that might help us communicate with workers from the 1950s. The crack in the rocks seemed to be watching us as we approached. The temperature around the entrance was at least 10 degrees colder than the surrounding area, and there was a constant breeze flowing out of the mine that smelled like coal dust and decay. "Air's moving," Jerry observed, checking his instruments. "That shouldn't be possible. All the ventilation shafts were sealed decades ago." We squeezed through the entrance and immediately noticed changes from the day before. The vintage mining equipment was arranged differently, like someone had been using it. The tunnel floor showed fresh boot prints in the coal dust, dozens of them, all heading deeper into the mine. "Sam, look at this." Jerry was kneeling next to one of the clear boot prints. Size L, even work boot, heavy tread. This print can't be more than a few hours old. But the print was made by a boot style that hadn't been manufactured since the 1950s. We followed the trail, deeper into the mine than we'd ever gone before. The main tunnel split into smaller passages, each one marked with hand-painted signs. Seam 7, Seam 12, Main Shaft, Danger. The sounds started about 15 minutes in. Not the industrial machinery we'd heard the day before, but quieter sounds. Picks hitting rock, shovels scraping stone, men talking in low voices, though we couldn't make out the words. "They're working," Jerry whispered. "Just like you said." We crept toward the sounds, using our quietest flashlights. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber carved from solid rock, and what we saw there made us both stop breathing. The chamber was full of miners, dozens of men in 1950s work clothes, swinging picks and shoveling coal into wooden carts. They moved with mechanical precision, like they'd been doing the same motions for decades, which I realized they had. But these weren't the solid, threatening figures we'd encountered the day before. In the dim light of our flashlights, they looked faded, translucent, like old photographs that had been left in the sun too long. They were so focused on their work that they didn't notice us at first. We watched, fascinated and horrified, as they went through the motions of mining coal from seams that had been exhausted 35 years ago. Their tools passed through solid rock like it wasn't there, but somehow they still managed to fill their carts with coal that sparkled in our flashlight beams. That's when one of them looked up. It was the tall man with the mustache from the day before, but in the better light, I could see details I'd missed. His face was pale gray like old newspaper. His clothes were scorched and torn, and where his eyes should have been were just dark holes that seemed to go on forever. "Well, hello there, boys," he said, setting down his pick. His voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You decided to join us for the afternoon shift, did you?" The other miners stopped working and turned to look at us. All of them had the same gray faces, the same dark eye sockets. Some had injuries that should have been fatal: crushed skulls, twisted limbs, chests caved in from falling rocks. "We're just inspecting the mine," Jerry managed to say, "making sure it's safe." The tall miner laughed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Safe? Son, this mine hasn't been safe since 1952, but that don't matter now. Work's got to be done." He picked up his tool again and took a step toward us. The other miners did the same, forming a loose circle, not threatening exactly, but not letting us leave either. "Now, you boys look strong," the tall miner continued. "Good backs on you. Bet you could swing a pick real nice. We've been short-handed for decades. Company's been promising us more workers, but they never seem to stay long enough to finish their shifts. The missing people, the hikers and hunters who'd disappeared, they hadn't just vanished. They'd been recruited." "Where are they?" I asked. "The people who disappeared. What happened to them?" The tall miner gestured to the other workers. In the shifting light, I could see that some of the miners were wearing modern clothes, hiking boots instead of work boots, t-shirts instead of canvas overalls. Their faces had the same gray pallor, the same empty eye sockets. They'd been turned into miners, forced to work the same eternal shift as the men who'd died in 1952. "Don't you worry," the tall miner said, raising his pick. "After a few months down here, you won't remember being anything else. Work becomes all you think about, all you need." The temperature dropped again. Our breath came out in thick clouds as the miners began to close in, but this time I was ready. "Wait," I called out, pulling some nothing from my jacket. "I have your pay vouchers." Every miner stopped moving. They stared at the papers in my hand like they were made of gold. Jerry had found them in the company records. Actual pay vouchers from BlackRock Mining, blank forms that would have been filled out for each worker at the end of their shift. In 1952, these pieces of paper would have meant food on the table and rent money. "Company sent us to settle up your accounts," I said, hoping I sounded official. "But we need to verify your work records first." The tall miner lowered his pick. "Pay vouchers? We ain't been paid since March 15th, 1952. Company said there was some kind of paperwork problem." March 15th, 1952. The day they'd died. "That's what we're here to fix," Jerry said, catching on to my plan. "But first we need to check the main office records, make sure everything's documented properly." "Main office is up top," one of the other miners said. "Been sealed up for years." "We have access," I lied. "But we'll need to go up and get the records. File the proper paperwork, you understand." The miners looked at each other uncertainly. After 35 years of working without pay, the promise of finally getting their money was too tempting to ignore. "How long will that take?" the tall miner asked. "Few hours, maybe. We'll be back before the night shift starts." It was a gamble, but it worked. The miners stepped aside, letting us pass. As we headed back toward the entrance, the tall miner called after us, "You boys better not be lying. We've been waiting a long time to collect what we're owed." We didn't start running until we were out of their sight. But even as we ran, I could hear them behind us, starting up their work songs again. And I knew that if we didn't find a real solution, they'd be waiting for us when we came back. The question was, how do you pay dead men for work they'll never finish? The BlackRock Mining Company office building was still standing, barely, about 5 miles down the mountain from the mine entrance. The windows were boarded up and the roof was caving in, but Jerry's contacts at the state archives had given us permission to search for any remaining company documents. What we found in the basement changed everything. File cabinets full of papers, somehow preserved in the dry underground storage, employment records, safety reports, financial documents, and something else. A folder marked Special Contracts, Executive Authorization Required. Jerry pulled out the contracts with shaking hands. They looked similar to the standard employment agreements we'd seen at the library, but the language was different, stranger. And at the bottom of each one, instead of a signature in ink, was what looked like a dark red stain. "Sam, look at the date on these," Jerry said. "March 10th, 1952, 5 days before the cave-in." I read over the contract language, and my blood went cold. These weren't normal employment agreements. They were something else entirely. "Employee hereby binds soul and spirit to company service," I read aloud. "In exchange for guaranteed employment, employee agrees to continue assigned duties until formal release is granted by company management or designated representative." "Soul and spirit," Jerry repeated. "And look at this clause. Employee understands that termination of physical existence shall not void this agreement." Sam, these contracts were designed to keep workers after death. But the worst part was at the bottom of each contract, above the red stain that had replaced signatures. In small print, "Payment in blood confirms acceptance of terms." They signed these contracts in their own blood, Jerry said. 5 days before they died. Someone knew that cave-in was coming. I flipped through the contracts, counting names. 47 documents, each one signed by a man who would die 5 days later. And at the very bottom of the pile, I found something that made me sick. 2 blank contracts dated that same day, March 10th, 1952. But someone had written names on them in fresh ink: Samuel Crowthorne and Jerry Blackwood. "Jerry," I said quietly, "we need to get out of here. Now." Before he could ask why, we heard footsteps on the floor above us. Heavy boots, moving in formation. The miners had found us. The basement had only one exit, a wooden staircase that led up to the main floor. We could hear them up there, moving furniture, searching the building. The tall miner's voice echoed down through the floor. "Boys, we know you're in here. Found your truck outside. You get them pay vouchers figured out yet?" Jerry grabbed the contracts and stuffed them in his jacket. I looked around for another way out and spotted a small window at ground level, barely big enough for a man to squeeze through. "That way," I whispered, pointing to the window. As we crept toward it, the footsteps above us stopped. Then the tall miner's voice again, closer this time. "Found the basement stairs. They're down here, boys." The window was painted shut and covered with 35 years of dirt. Jerry and I attacked it with our pocket knives, scraping frantically at the paint while boots thundered down the wooden stairs behind us. The window finally gave way just as the first miner appeared at the bottom of the stairs. But it wasn't the tall man this time. It was one of the modern recruits, a hiker in a flannel shirt and jeans, his face gray and his eyes empty black holes. "Please," he said in a voice like wind through a graveyard, "don't leave me here. I've been digging for so long. I just want to go home." For a moment, I almost stopped. This had been a real person once, someone with a family, friends, a life above ground. But Jerry grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the window. "He's one of them now, Sam. We can't help him." More miners poured down the stairs, the original 47 mixed with their modern recruits. All of them gray-faced, all carrying the tools they'd been forced to use for decades. They moved toward us with that same mechanical precision we both had seen in the mine. Jerry went through the window first. I was halfway through when a cold hand grabbed my ankle. "You signed the contract," the tall miner said, holding up one of those blank documents. Our names were written on it now in what looked like blood. "Company policy, no backing out once you've signed." "We never signed anything," I said, kicking at his hand. "Blood calls to blood," he replied. "You bled in our mine yesterday. Cut your hand on the rocks when you were running. That's signature enough." I looked down at my palm. There was indeed a small cut from the day before, already healed. But according to the contract terms, it might be enough. The miner's grip was like ice, burning cold. I could feel the life draining out of my leg where he touched me. In another few seconds, I'd be as gray and empty as the rest of them. That's when Jerry threw something through the window. Fire erupted in the basement as the old papers caught light. The miners shrieked and let go of me, stumbling backward from the flames. I pulled myself through the window and rolled onto the ground outside, gasping. "The contracts," Jerry said, helping me to my feet. "I kept one and burned the rest. Without the original documents, they can't hold anyone to the terms." Inside the burning building, the miners were screaming, not in pain, but in anguish, like they were finally understanding what had been done to them. We ran to the truck and drove away as fast as the icy roads would allow. Behind us, the old office building burned like a beacon against the gray sky. But even over the roar of flames and the sound of our engine, I could still hear them. They were singing. Not the work songs this time, something else. Something that sounded almost like relief. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." The singing followed us down the mountain until we were miles away from Black Rock. Only then did Jerry pull out the contract he'd saved, the one with the company's official seal and signature. "What are you going to do with that?" I asked. Jerry looked at me with a grim smile. "File it with the state labor department. Someone needs to officially terminate their employment." 3 hours later, Jerry Blackwood, acting as an authorized representative of the state of West Virginia Department of Labor, formally voided the employment contracts of 47 miners who had died in 1952. We drove back up to Black Rock as the sun was setting, not sure what we'd find. The mine entrance was still there, but it felt different, warmer. The constant breeze that had blown out of the crack in the rocks had stopped. I squeezed through the entrance one last time and found the tunnel empty. No equipment, no boot prints, no sounds of digging or singing, just bare rock and 35 years' worth of undisturbed coal dust. On the wall where the miners had scratched "Shift change 6 p.m., someone had written something new. In coal dust finger writing that was already starting to fade. "Thank you." That was 8 months ago. The state sealed the mine entrance permanently with steel and concrete, not because of safety concerns, but because I recommended it in my report. Some places should stay closed. Jerry transferred to the eastern part of the state, said he needed a change of scenery. I stayed on as ranger, but I've made some changes too. Every abandoned mine in my district gets a monthly safety check now, and I always carry copies of labor law documentation just in case. The 3 urban explorers were buried with full honors once the coroner released their bodies. Their deaths went down in the official records as accidental carbon monoxide poisoning in an abandoned mine. Close enough to the truth that I can live with it. But sometimes, late at night in my ranger station, I get calls from other parts of Appalachia, rangers and sheriff's deputies who've found bodies in impossible places, who've heard machinery running in mines that have been closed, said for decades, who've seen lights moving underground where no lights should be. The coal companies left a lot of contracts behind when they pulled out of these mountains, a lot of men who died with unfinished business, and not all of those contracts have been found and voided yet. Last month, I got a call from a ranger up in Pennsylvania, 3 hikers missing near an old anthracite mine, strange sounds coming from underground. He wanted to know if I'd ever dealt with anything like that before. I told him I'd drive up with Jerry and some paperwork from the state labor department, because if there's one thing I learned from Black Rock, it's that some debts follow you past the grave. And sometimes, the only way to set things right is to give the dead what they've been waiting for all along. The work is dangerous, but somebody has to do it. These mountains are full of forgotten places where forgotten men are still trying to finish jobs that killed them decades ago. They're not evil, most of them. Just trapped by contracts they signed when they were desperate for work and didn't read the fine print. But that's the thing about fine print. It's always important, especially when it's written in blood. So, if you're ever hiking in coal country and you hear machinery running underground, or see lights moving in abandoned mines, or smell coal dust on a breeze that shouldn't be there, just keep walking. Don't investigate. Don't try to help. Because some shifts never end. And there's always room for one more worker underground. My name is Samuel Crowthorne, and I've spent 24 years protecting these mountains. 8 of those years, I've been protecting people from things that should have died long ago, but couldn't figure out how to clock out. The work never stops, but then again, neither do the miners. My name is Margaret Alderbark, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. In all that time working the Daniel Boone National Forest, I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Lost hikers, bear attacks, kids falling off cliffs, you name it. My job was keeping families safe while they enjoyed the wilderness. I taught camping classes, led nature walks, and made sure everyone went home with good memories instead of ending up on the evening news. The Red River Gorge was my specialty. Those sandstone cliffs and hidden caves were like a second home to me. I knew every trail, every dangerous drop-off, every spot where kids might wander away from their parents. Before becoming a ranger, I taught elementary school for 8 years. I understood how children think, how they move, what scares them, and what draws them in. That's why what happened in June of 1976 shook me so hard. The heat that summer was brutal. 95 degrees with humidity so thick you could barely breathe. Most families stayed closer to the visitor centers where there was air conditioning and cold drinks. But the Hendricks family decided to hike deep into the gorge, 20 miles from the nearest road. Tom and Linda Hendricks brought their 2 kids, 8-year-old Danny and 6-year-old Sarah. They seemed like good parents when they checked in at the ranger station. Tom had camping experience from his Army days, and Linda had packed enough supplies for a week, even though they were only staying 3 days. The kids were excited, bouncing around while their parents filled out the permit forms. "You folks picked a beautiful spot," I told them, marking their campsite on the map. "Cave Run Trail is one of my favorites. Just watch the kids around those cliff edges and remember to hang your food high. We've had some aggressive bears this season. Tom nodded seriously. Will, be careful, Ranger Alderbark. Kids, what do we say when we see a bear? Make ourselves big and back away slowly, Danny and Sarah chimed together. I smiled and handed Linda a whistle. Just in case. 3 sharp blasts if you need help. They headed out that Tuesday morning, and I expected to see them back Friday afternoon, tired but happy. Instead, I got a call Thursday night from another camper who'd heard screaming coming from their direction. The local legends about the Mountain Mother were just hillbilly stories, or so I thought. Old-timers claimed she lived deep in the caves, taking care of children who got lost in the woods. Kids who fell off cliffs or wandered away from camp would disappear for weeks, then come back changed, wilder, stranger, like they'd learned to live with the animals. Most folks said it was just imagination, people trying to explain why some missing children were never found. I'd handled dozens of missing child cases over the years. Usually we found them within a few hours, scared and crying but safe. Sometimes we found bodies, but we always found something. The Hendricks case would be different. I led the search team out at first light Friday morning, 2 other rangers, a sheriff's deputy, and 3 volunteer searchers with tracking dogs. The hike to their campsite took us 4 hours through thick woods and narrow canyon paths. The air was dead still, no wind at all, which was strange for that elevation. We found Tom and Linda first. They were torn apart about 50 yards from their tent, killed by something with claws and teeth bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. The attack had been violent but quick. They probably didn't suffer long. What bothered me was the camp itself. The tent was still standing, their food was untouched, and the children's sleeping bags were empty but neatly arranged. Where are the kids? Asked Jim Morrison, on Ike of the other rangers. The tracking dogs picked up Danny and Sarah's scent immediately, but instead of the frantic, scattered trail I expected from terrified children running from a predator, their footprints showed they'd walked away calmly. No running, no signs of being dragged or carried. The trail led toward the cliff face, a sheer sandstone wall that rose 200 feet straight up. The dogs followed the scent right to the base of the rock, then started whining and backing away. They wouldn't go any closer. Kids probably fell, the deputy said, looking up at the cliff. Or whatever killed the parents got them too. I knelt down to examine the rock face more closely. About 10 feet up, I found something that made my stomach drop. Handprints. Small ones, just the right size for Danny and Sarah, but they were 40 feet up the cliff, pressed into the stone like the rock was soft clay. Jim, I called. Come look at this. He joined me, squinting up at the marks. How did those get there? I don't know. I pulled out my radio. Base, this is Ranger Alderbark. We're going to need climbing equipment and more searchers. The children's trail goes up the cliff face. The radio crackled with static, then something that sounded like singing. Children's voices, high and sweet, singing a lullaby I'd never heard before. The other searchers heard it too, looking around with confused expressions. Base, do you copy? I tried again. More singing, then silence. We set up a base camp and waited for the climbing gear. As the afternoon wore on, the forest around us got quieter and quieter. No bird songs, no insect buzzing. Even the wind died completely. It felt like the mountains were holding their breath. Then we heard the laughter. It came from somewhere above us, echoing off the canyon walls. 2 children giggling and playing, their voices bouncing around so much we couldn't tell where they were coming from. Danny and Sarah, definitely. I recognized their voices from when they'd checked in at the station. Danny, Sarah, I shouted. Can you hear me? It's Ranger Margaret. The laughter stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then Sarah's voice drifted down to us, faint but clear. We're safe, Ranger Margaret. Mama's taking care of us. Mama. Linda Hendricks was dead, torn apart in their campsite. Sarah, honey, you need to come down. We're here to help you. No answer, just the sound of feet running across rocks somewhere high above us. When the climbing equipment arrived that evening, I went up the cliff myself. The handprints in the stone were real. I could feel the impressions with my fingers. But there was no way 2 small children could have climbed this wall, even with proper gear. Halfway up, I found a crack in the rock face that opened into a narrow cave. The passage was barely wide enough for an adult, but it went deep into the mountain. I squeezed inside with my flashlight and followed it for maybe 100 yards before it opened into a larger chamber. What I found there made me understand why the dogs wouldn't come near the cliff. The cave was furnished like a child's bedroom. Small chairs made from animal bones tied together with strips of hide. Beds woven from grass and moss. Crude toys carved from wood and stone. Everything was child-sized, built for little hands. On the walls were drawings, stick figures of children playing, animals dancing, and in the center of them all, a tall figure with long arms reaching out to embrace smaller shapes. The children in the drawings all had huge smiles. At the back of the chamber, another passage led deeper into the mountain. I could hear movement coming from that direction. Footsteps, whispered conversations, and underneath it all, a low humming sound, like a mother singing her babies to sleep. I knew I should go back, get back up, follow proper procedures. But those were real children down there, and they'd already been missing for 2 days. I folded, lowered the sound deeper into the darkness. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow I had to crawl, sometimes opening into chambers big enough for a house. My flashlight beam showed more cave paintings on the walls, the same tall figure watching over children, protecting them from things with sharp teeth and claws. The humming got louder as I went deeper. It was definitely a woman's voice, low and soothing, singing something that reminded me of the lullabies my own mother used to sing. But there were other sounds too. Children whispering, feet running across stone, and something else I couldn't identify. A scraping noise, like fingernails on rock. I'd been underground for almost an hour when I reached the main chamber. It was huge, maybe the size of a basketball court, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above my head. The walls were covered in more drawings, hundreds of them, showing the tall figure leading children through forests, hiding them in caves, feeding them, and keeping them safe. But it was the children themselves that made me stop breathing. There were 12 of them, all different ages, from maybe 4 years old to teenagers. They sat in a circle around a small fire, and when my flashlight hit them, they all turned to look at me with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. Danny and Sarah Hendricks sat closest to the fire. They looked healthy, clean, and completely unafraid. When they saw me, they smiled and waved like they were greeting an old friend. "Hi, Ranger Margaret," Sarah called out. "Look, we made new friends." The other children didn't speak. They just stared at me with those glowing eyes. Some of them looked familiar, and with a chill I realized why. I'd seen their faces on missing person posters. Kids who'd vanished from campsites and hiking trails over the years. Some of them had been gone for months. Others. The oldest boy in the group looked about 16. His clothes were tattered but clean, and his skin was pale from living underground. I remembered his case from when I first started as a ranger. Billy Sutton disappeared in 1962 during a family camping trip. He would be 30 years old now, but he looked exactly the same as in his missing person photo. "How long have you been down here?" I asked him. Billy tilted his head like he didn't understand the question. When he spoke, his voice was strange, half human words, half animal sounds. "Time is different with Mama," he said. "She keeps us safe, feeds us, protects us from the bad people." "What bad people?" A new voice answered from the darkness behind me. "The ones who hurt children." I spun around and nearly dropped my flashlight. The woman standing at the cave entrance was the tallest person I'd ever seen, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Her hair hung down past her waist in thick, dark waves. Her clothes looked like they were made from animal skins and plant fibers, but it was her face that made my heart race. She was beautiful, but not in a human way. Her features were too sharp, too perfect. Her skin was pale as moonlight, and her eyes were completely black. When she smiled, I saw teeth that were too white and too sharp. "You're Margaret," she said, and her voice was the same one that had been humming through the caves. The children told me about you. You keep families safe. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. There was something about her presence that made me feel like a small child myself, wanting nothing more than to curl up and let someone else take care of everything. I'm the Mountain Mother, she continued, moving closer. These are my children now. I found them when they were lost, hurt, abandoned. I gave them a home where no one can harm them. Their families are looking for them, I managed to say. They need to go home. The Mountain Mother's expression darkened. Home? To parents who let them wander into danger? To families who don't watch them carefully enough? She gestured to Howard, Danny, and Sarah. Their parents are dead because they brought children into my mountains without respecting the dangers here. You killed Tom and Linda. I protected the children from watching their parents be torn apart by the real predators in these woods. Bears, wildcats, snakes. There are many things that hunt in the darkness. I am the only one who can keep the little ones truly safe. She knelt down next to the circle of children, and they all leaned toward her like flowers turning to the sun. Her voice became soft and gentle again. I've been caring for lost children in these mountains for longer than your people have lived here. I know what children need. Love, safety, a mother who will never leave them or let them be hurt. One of the smaller children, a girl maybe 5 years old, climbed into the Mountain Mother's lap. I recognized her from a missing person poster I'd seen just last month. Emma Cartwright vanished during a church camp outing. But they can't stay here forever, I said. They need education, medical care, other people. They have everything they need. The Mountain Mother stood up, still holding Emma. They have brothers and sisters who understand them. They have a mother who will never abandon them. And they have the gift I've given them. What gift? She smiled again, showing those sharp teeth. Show her, children. The kids got up from around the fire and walked to the cave walls. Then they started climbing. Not using ropes or equipment, they climbed the sheer stone like spiders, their fingers and toes finding holds in the smooth rock. Within seconds, they were all hanging from the ceiling 30 feet above my head, looking down at me with those glowing eyes. They can go anywhere in my mountains now, the Mountain Mother said. Nothing can hurt them. They'll never grow old, never get sick, never die. I've made them perfect. But as I watched the children on the ceiling, I noticed something else. Their fingernails had grown long and sharp. Their teeth looked different, pointed, like the Mountain Mother's, and in the way they moved wasn't quite human anymore. What have you done to them? I whispered. I've made them mine, she replied. And now, Margaret, who keeps families safe, I have a choice for you. The children dropped down from the ceiling, landing silently around me in a circle. They weren't smiling anymore. You can join my family and help me care for the children forever. Or, she paused, and the temperature in the cave seemed to drop 10 degrees. You can try to leave and tell others about us, but if you do that, I'll have to make sure you can never lead anyone else to my home. I looked around at the circle of children. Danny and Sarah Hendricks stood right in front of me. Sarah reached out and took my hand with fingers that felt cold as ice. Stay with us, Ranger Margaret, she said. It's nice here. We're never scared anymore. The Mountain Mother was right about one thing. The children did look safe and happy, but they also looked wrong, changed into something that wasn't quite human anymore. And somewhere up above, their families were searching for them, crying for them, never knowing what had happened. I had to make a choice, and I was running out of time to make it. I need time to think, I told the Mountain Mother. She nodded slowly. Time moves differently here, Margaret. You have until the sun touches the mountain peaks tomorrow. Then you must choose. Become part of my family, or never leave these caves. The children settled back around the fire, while the Mountain Mother disappeared into one of the side passages. I sat down next to Danny and Sarah, trying to figure out what to do. Are you really happy here? I asked them quietly. Oh yes, Danny said, but his voice sounded strange. Older somehow. Mama takes such good care of us. We never have to worry about anything. Don't you miss your real mom and dad? Sarah looked confused. What do you mean? Mama is our real mom now. She chose us, and we chose her. I studied their faces in the firelight. They looked healthy, but there was something missing in their eyes. The spark of curiosity and mischief that I remembered from the ranger station was gone. They seemed happy, but it was the blank happiness of people who'd stopped thinking for themselves. The older children were worse. Billy Sutton had been down here for 14 years, and he moved like an animal now, sometimes walking on all fours. When he spoke, it was mostly in growls and chirps. The mountain mother had kept him safe, but she'd also stolen his humanity. I waited until the children fell asleep, then started exploring the cave system. My flashlight was getting dimmer, but I found several passages that seemed to lead upward. The mountain mother was nowhere to be seen, but I could feel her presence watching me from somewhere in the darkness. In one of the side chambers, I found bones. Human bones, adult-sized, picked clean and arranged in neat piles. These weren't from the Hendricks. The bones were old, yellowed with age. The mountain mother had been protecting children for a long time, and their parents had paid the price. I also found something else that made my blood run cold. Modern items scattered among the bones. Wristwatches, jewelry, camping equipment. All from adults who'd come looking for their missing children over the years. Other rangers, police officers, family members. The mountain mother had killed them all to protect her secret. By the time I made it back to the main chamber, I'd made my decision. I couldn't stay and become another one of her collection, but I also couldn't leave these children here to slowly lose their humanity. Somehow, I had to find a way to save them. The mountain mother was waiting for me when I returned. She sat by the fire with Emma Cartwright on her lap, stroking the little girl's hair. "Have you decided, Margaret?" "I want to understand something first," I said. "Why do you do this? What made you start taking children?" Her expression softened, and for a moment she looked almost human. "I was a child once too, long ago. My people lived in these mountains before yours came. My parents were killed by settlers when I was very young. I hid in these caves, alone and terrified, until I learned to survive." She gestured around at the cave paintings. "I swore that no child would ever suffer the way I did. When I found children who were lost, hurt, or abandoned, I brought them here where they would always be safe, where no one could ever hurt them again." "But you're hurting them," I said. "You're changing them into something they're not supposed to be." Her eyes flashed with anger. "I'm protecting them. Do you know what happens to children in your world? They get sick, they get hurt, they grow old and die. They're abused by the people who should love them. They're exposed to violence and cruelty and pain. But that's part of being human," I argued. "The good and the bad together. You can't protect someone by taking away their choices." "I can, and I do." She stood up, and suddenly she seemed even taller, her shadow stretching across the cave walls. "I've watched your kind for generations, Margaret. You fail your children again and again. You bring them into danger. You abandon them when they need you most. You let them be hurt by monsters wearing human faces. Some parents are bad, but not all of them. Danny and Sarah's parents loved them. They brought them camping to spend time together, to show them the beauty of nature. They didn't know about you." "They should have," the mountain mother snarled. "These are my mountains. Every parent who brings children here should know to ask for my protection first." That's when I understood. The mountain mother wasn't evil, exactly. She was a traumatized child who'd never grown up, never learned that you couldn't keep people safe by imprisoning them. She genuinely, too, thought she was helping. But understanding her didn't change what I had to do. "I've made my decision," I told her. "I'll stay with you and help take care of the children, but only if you let them choose for themselves. Tell them the truth about what's happening to them. Show them what they're becoming, and let them decide if they want to stay or go home." The mountain mother's eyes narrowed. "That's not how this works, Margaret." "Then I can't stay." I expected her to attack me then, to use her claws and teeth like she had on the Hendricks and all those other parents over the years. Instead, she did something worse. She started to sing. The sound filled the cave, seeming to come from everywhere at once. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard, a lullaby that made me think of my own mother, of being small and safe and loved. My eyelids felt heavy, my muscles relaxed, and all I wanted was to curl up by the fire and let the Mountain Mother take care of everything forever. The children woke up and joined in the song, their voices blending with hers in perfect harmony. I felt myself taking a step toward the fire, then another. The Mountain Mother held out her arms to me, smiling, and I wanted nothing more than to accept her embrace. But then I caught sight of Billy Sutton. He was singing too, but tears were streaming down his face. Somewhere deep inside, the boy he'd been was still trapped, still fighting, still wanting to go home to parents who were probably dead by now. I bit down hard on my tongue, using the pain to break through the Mountain Mother's hypnotic song. The taste of blood in my mouth helped me remember who I was and why I was here. "No!" I shouted, pulling out the emergency whistle I always carried. I blew 3 sharp blasts, the sound echoing off the cave walls and breaking the spell. The Mountain Mother shrieked in rage, her beautiful face twisting into something monstrous. Her fingernails grew into claws, her teeth became fangs, and she lunged at me with inhuman speed. I dove aside, but not quickly enough. Her claws raked across my shoulder, sending me sprawling. Blood soaked through my uniform shirt as I scrambled toward one of the cave passages. "You cannot leave!" she roared behind me. "You know our secret! I cannot let you tell others!" I ran through the twisting passages, following the upward slope toward what I hoped was an exit. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. Behind me, I could hear the Mountain Mother coming, her claws scraping against the stone walls. The children were following too, their voices calling out to me in the darkness. "Don't leave us, Ranger Margaret. Stay with our family. Mama will take care of you." But underneath their words, I heard something else, a different plea, desperate and barely audible. "Help us." I kept running, feeling my way through the darkness until I saw a faint glow ahead. Moonlight filtering down through a crack in the cave ceiling. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person, but it led to the outside world. I squeezed through the gap just as the Mountain Mother's claws scraped against the stone where I'd been. She was too big to follow me through the crack, but her voice echoed up from below. "This isn't over, Margaret. I will find you. I will protect my children from people like you." I emerged onto a ledge high on the cliff face, gasping in the cool night air. Far below, I could see the lights of the search team's base camp. They were still looking for me. But as I started to climb down, I realized my real problem was just beginning. How could I explain what I'd found? Who would believe me? And even if they did, how could we rescue children who didn't want to be rescued? The Mountain Mother was right about one thing. I couldn't just leave and pretend this never happened. Those children needed help, whether they knew it or not. It took me 3 hours to climb down the cliff face and make it back to base camp. By the time I got there, my shoulder was still bleeding and I was shaking from exhaustion and shock. The other rangers rushed to help me, asking a dozen questions at once. "Where have you been? What happened to your shoulder? Did you find the children?" I looked around at their concerned faces. Good people who'd spent days searching for Danny and Sarah. People who genuinely wanted to help. How could I tell them the truth? "I found a cave system up on the cliff face," I said finally. "It's extensive, goes deep into the mountain. The children, their voices are coming from somewhere inside, but the passages are too narrow and dangerous for a full rescue operation." It wasn't exactly a lie. The passages were dangerous, just not in the way they thought. We called in a specialist cave rescue team from Louisville, but by the time they arrived 2 days later, the voices had stopped. The searchers explored every passage they could find, but discovered no trace of Danny and Sarah Hendricks. After a week, the search was officially called off. The children were declared dead, presumed to have fallen into an underground river or chasm. I attended their memorial service. Tom and Linda's parents were there, crying for the grandchildren they'd never see again. I wanted to tell them the truth, that Danny and Sarah were still alive, still down there in the darkness. But what good would it do? The children had chosen the Mountain Mother over their own families. They were lost in ways that went deeper than just being physically missing. That should have been the end of it. File the paperwork, move on to the next case, try to forget what I'd seen in those caves. But the mountain mother had been right about something else. This wasn't over. 3 months later, another family went missing. The Washingtons from Ohio, camping with their twin boys near the same area where the Hendricks had died. We found the parents' bodies, but the children, 7-year-old Marcus and Michael, had vanished without a trace. I was part of the search team again. We followed Proced. Used the dogs, explored every possibility. But I knew where those boys had really gone. Late at night, when the wind was right, I could hear children singing in the caves. Not just Marcus and Michael, but all of them. The Mountain Mother's collection was growing. Over the next 2 years, 4 more families lost children in the Red River Gorge. The pattern was always the same. Parents killed by animal attacks. Children missing. Searches that turned up nothing. The newspapers started calling it the Gorge Curse, writing stories about an ancient evil that stalked the mountains. They weren't wrong. I tried to do something about it. I went back to the caves by myself several times, trying to find another way in, another approach. But the Mountain Mother was always waiting. She'd appear at the edge of my flashlight beam, smiling that terrible smile, reminding me of our deal. "I offered you a place in my family, Margaret," she told me during one of these encounters. "You chose to leave, but you cannot stop me from protecting the children who need me." "They don't need you," I argued. "They need their real families, their own lives, choices." "Look around," she said, gesturing toward the forest. "How many children go missing in your world every year? How many are hurt, abandoned, killed by the very people who should protect them? I save the ones I can." I couldn't argue with her completely. In my work as a ranger, I'd seen too many cases of child abuse, neglect, and worse. Some of the families who came camping were running from something. Bad marriages, financial problems, legal troubles. Not all parents were as good as they seemed. But that didn't justify what the Mountain Mother was doing. Children deserved the chance to grow up, to make mistakes, to experience both joy and sorrow. They deserved to be human. The breaking point came during my 5th year on the job. A teenage girl named Amy Clearwater went missing during a school camping trip. She was 15, old enough to have a real life, friends, dreams for the future. When we found her empty, sleeping bag and the trail leading to the familiar cliff face, I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to try something different. I quit my job as a ranger and spent 6 months researching everything I could about the Mountain Mother legend. I talked to local historians, elderly residents who remembered the old stories, even some Cherokee elders who knew about the ancient spirits of the mountains. What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. The Mountain Mother wasn't just a traumatized child who'd grown into a monster. She was something much older, a spirit that had been feeding on human children for centuries. The trauma story she'd told me was partially true, but it wasn't the whole truth. She'd been taking children long before white settlers arrived in Kentucky, long before her supposed human family was killed. She was a predator that had learned to disguise itself as a protector. Armed with this knowledge, I went back to the caves one final time. But instead of going alone, I brought help, a Cherokee medicine woman named Rosa Whitefeather, who knew the old ways of dealing with spirits like the Mountain Mother. That confrontation is a story for another time. All I'll say now is that we succeeded, partially. The Mountain Mother was bound, prevented from taking any more children, but the ones she'd already claimed, some were too far gone to save. Others chose to stay with the only family they remembered. I managed to bring 3 children back to the surface world, Amy Clearwater and 2 younger boys who'd been missing for less than a year. They recovered, slowly and with a lot of help, but they recovered. They're adults now, living normal lives, though they all avoid camping and refuse to discuss what happened to them. The rest, including Danny and Sarah Hendricks, are still down there. Sometimes on quiet nights when I'm hiking alone in the mountains, I can hear them singing. They sound happy in their way, safe, protected, but they also sound lost. I never went back to work as a ranger. Instead, I became a private investigator specializing in missing children cases. I've helped reunite dozens of families over the years, and I've learned to spot the signs of supernatural involvement in disappearances. Because here's the thing most people don't understand. The Mountain Mother wasn't unique. There are others like her in different places using different methods, spirits and creatures that have learned to exploit our deepest instincts to protect children, twisting that love into something dark and possessive. They're still out there, still taking children, still convinced they're the good guys in the story. So if you ever go camping with your family, if you ever take your kids into the wilderness, remember this. There are worse things than bears and snakes hiding in the deep woods. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from something that claims to love your children more than you do. And sometimes the monster really believes it's the hero. Listen for the singing. Watch for the handprints on impossible cliff faces. And if your children start talking about a new mama who wants to take them somewhere safe, run. Run fast and don't look back. My name is Rebecca Thornbush, and I've been a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park for 13 years. I study animals for a living, specifically how predators hunt and kill their prey. I have a PhD in wildlife biology, and I've tracked over 200 mountain lions in my career. I know the difference between a bear kill and a cougar kill. I can tell you if wolves were involved just by looking at bite marks. I'm good at my job because I believe in facts, not stories. My grandmother used to tell me old Monacan Indian tales about those who wear other skins. Shapeshifters, she called them, creatures that could steal the form of any animal they killed. I always smiled and nodded, but I never believed her. How could I? I'm a scientist. That changed in October of 1981, up on Old Rag Mountain. It was unseasonably warm that fall, 75 degrees when it should have been 50. The leaves were perfect, all gold and red, bringing crowds of hikers to our trails. But 12 miles from Skyline Drive in the deep wilderness where I work, it was quiet. Too quiet. I'd been called in to investigate some livestock kills on farms that border the park. Nothing unusual about that. Predators don't care about property lines. But when I got to the first farm, something felt wrong. The farmer, Joe Martinez, led me to where he'd found his bull. A 2,000-pound animal dead in the middle of a field. But it wasn't the size of the kill that bothered me. It was how it died. Look at these bite marks, I told Joe, kneeling beside the carcass. See how the neck's torn? That's classic mountain lion. But these wounds on the hindquarters, that's wolf pack behavior. And these claw marks on the sides are from a bear. Joe spat tobacco juice into the grass. So what you're saying is 3 different predators killed my bull. That's impossible, I said, but I kept staring at the avid. Antuma. Predators are territorial. They don't share kills like this. Over the next week, I found 4 more kills just like it, all on different farms, all showing the same impossible pattern, multiple predator signatures on single animals. My trail cameras picked up blurred images of something moving through the woods, but I could never get a clear shot. I told myself it had to be a hybrid animal. Maybe a wolf dog that had learned unusual hunting techniques, or maybe a pack of feral dogs working with a cougar. Rare, but possible. I was wrong. The breakthrough came when I found tracks near the 4th kill site. I made plaster casts and took them back to my lab. Under magnification, they told an impossible story. The prints started as wolf tracks, 4 clear paw impressions in soft mud. But halfway across a small clearing, they changed. Same depth, same stride length, but suddenly they were cougar prints. Then, 20 feet later, they became bear prints. I stared at those casts for hours. There was no way an animal could change its paws mid-stride. It violated everything I knew about biology. But the evidence was right there in plaster. I decided to camp up on Old Rag Mountain for a week, hoping to catch whatever was killing the livestock. My partner Mike Reynolds, a state trooper who helped with wildlife issues, came with me. Mike was a good man, steady, reliable, not easily spooked. We set up camp in a small meadow about 8 miles from the nearest trail. I brought my best equipment, night vision cameras, motion sensors, audio recorders. If something was out there, I was going to document it. The first 3 nights were normal. We heard the usual sounds: owls, insects, small animals moving through the underbrush. My equipment recorded nothing unusual. Then, on the fourth night, everything went silent. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that complete silence means predator. When every cricket stops chirping and every mouse stops rustling, something dangerous is nearby. Mike and I sat in our tent, listening to nothing. "You hear that?" Mike whispered. "I don't hear anything," I said. "That's the problem." Then we heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling our campsite. But these weren't normal animal steps. They changed as we listened. Sometimes they sounded like a heavy bear shuffling through leaves. Sometimes like the soft padding of a big cat. Sometimes like the quick trot of a wolf. "One animal doesn't walk 3 different ways," Mike said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." The steps stopped right outside our tent. We could hear breathing, deep, slow, like a large animal thinking. Then, in a voice that sounded almost human, we heard a low chuckle. Animals don't chuckle. Mike reached for his gun. I grabbed my flashlight. But when we unzipped the tent and shined light outside, nothing was there. Just our equipment, undisturbed, and the dark forest beyond. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning I found tracks around our campsite, the same impossible tracks, changing from one animal to another. But these were fresh, and they told a clearer story. The creature had approached our tent as a wolf. The prints showed it stopping, then lying down in a sphinx position. That's when the prints changed to bear paws. It had stood up as a bear, walked closer to our tent, then dropped to all fours. The final prints, just 5 feet from our tent door, were cougar paws. It had been studying us, testing us, playing with us. "We're dealing with something that doesn't exist," I told Mike as we examined the tracks. "Well, it left tracks," he said. "So it exists enough." That afternoon, we found the first human victim. Her name was Sarah Chen, a 23-year-old hiker from Richmond. We found her body in a ravine 2 miles from our campsite. At first glance, it looked like a typical predator kill, throat torn, significant blood loss. But the more I examined her, the more wrong it became. The bite marks on her throat were from a mountain lion. The claw marks on her arms were from a bear. The tears in her legs showed wolf-pack feeding behavior. And the way her bones were cracked suggested something with human-like intelligence had used tools. "This is impossible," I said, photographing the wounds. "No animal hunts like this." Mike was examining the ground around the body. "Rebecca," he called, "you need to see this." He was pointing at a trail of footprints leading away from Sarah's body. But these weren't animal prints. They were human footprints. Bare feet, male, size 11. The prints led uphill toward a rocky outcropping about half a mile away. Mike and I followed them, our hands never far from our weapons. The trail ended at what looked like a natural cave entrance, hidden behind fallen boulders and thick vines. "Should we call for backup?" Mike asked. "We're 12 miles from the nearest road," I said, "and our radios don't work up here. It's just us." Mike checked his ammunition. "Then let's see what's in there." The cave was deeper than it looked from outside. Our flashlight beams showed rough stone walls stretching back into darkness. The air smelled wrong, not the clean mineral scent of most caves, but something organic, something rotting. 20 feet in, we found the first skin. It was a wolf pelt, perfectly preserved, laid out on a flat rock like someone was preparing to wear it. The fur was thick and gray, the paws still intact with claws attached. But when I touched it, the fur was warm. "That's not normal," Mike said. "Dead animals are cold." I lifted the pelt with a stick. Underneath, carved into the rock, were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, really old. Native American, maybe, but not like anything I'd studied. Deeper in the cave, we found more skins. A mountain lion hide, golden and spotted. A black bear pelt, massive and thick. Smaller ones, too. Fox, raccoon, deer. All of them warm to the touch. all of them arranged with the same strange symbols carved underneath. "How many are there?" Mike whispered. I counted. 12 different animals, all predators except the deer. And they're all warm. That's impossible. These hides have to be decades old, maybe older. But impossible or not, they were warm. Like the animals they came from had just died. At the back of the cave, we found the human clothes, jackets, boots, backpacks, all old, some so old they were falling apart. I recognized some of the brands: hiking gear from the 1960s, camping equipment from the 1940s. One backpack had a name tag, Robert Mills, 1923. "How long has this thing been killing people?" Mike asked. I was examining a leather jacket from what looked like the 1890s. "A long time." That's when we heard the voice. "You shouldn't be here." We spun around, flashlights cutting through the darkness. A man stood at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the daylight. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with long dark hair and weathered skin. He could have been Native American, or maybe just someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Sir, I'm Ranger Thornbush with the National Park Service," I called. "We're investigating some animal attacks. Are you injured? Do you need help?" The man stepped closer, and our lights caught his face. His eyes were wrong. Not the color, but the way they moved. They tracked us like a predator watching prey. "You found my collection," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Beautiful, aren't they? Each one teaches me something new." Mike's hand moved toward his gun. "Teaches you what?" The man smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp. "How to hunt, how to kill, how to become something better than human." "Sir, I need you to step back," Mike said, his weapon half drawn. The man laughed. "Your bullets won't help you, Officer Reynolds." Mike frowned. "How do you know my name?" "I can smell your fear. I can hear your heartbeat. I know everything about you now." The man took another step forward. "Jew, it's like I knew everything about Sarah Chen before I killed her." That's when Mike drew his gun completely. "Don't move." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" The man's smile widened. "Go ahead." Mike fired 3 shots, center mass. The man staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he began to change. His face stretched forward, becoming a muzzle. His fingers extended into claws. His skin sprouted thick, gray fur. In seconds, a massive wolf stood where the man had been. But this wasn't a normal wolf. It was bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen, and its eyes held human intelligence. "Run," I whispered to Mike. The wolf that had been a man let out a howl that echoed through the cave. Then it charged. We ran. Behind us, I could hear the thing chasing us, but the sounds kept changing. Sometimes heavy bear paws on stone. Sometimes the quick padding of cat feet. Sometimes the clip-clop of hooves. It was changing forms while it ran. We burst out of the cave and into daylight, but the thing was right behind us. Mike turned and fired again, catching it in the shoulder as it emerged. This time it looked like a mountain lion, golden and sleek. The bullets barely slowed it down. "The trees!" I shouted. "Climb!" We scrambled up the nearest oak, pulling ourselves branch by branch toward the canopy. Below us, the mountain lion paced in circles, then sat back on its haunches, and changed again. This time it became a bear, a big black bear that could easily climb the tree we were hiding in. "It's learning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's testing different forms to see which one can catch us." The bear started climbing. Mike and I went higher, pushing toward branches that might not hold a bear's weight. The bear followed, the tree swaying under its bulk. Then, just as it reached for my foot with one massive paw, the branch it was standing on cracked. The bear fell 30 feet to the ground, land. Ding with a wet thud. For a moment it lay still. Then it stood up, apparently unhurt, and looked up at us with what I swear was amusement. It opened its mouth and spoke in a perfectly human voice. "I can wait." We stayed in that tree for 6 hours. The thing, I couldn't think of it as human anymore, sat at the base and waited. Sometimes it was a bear, sometimes a wolf. Once, for about an hour, it took the form of a man again and told us stories. Stories about the people it had killed. Sarah Chen was a good hunt, it said conversationally. She ran for 3 miles before I caught her. Strong legs. I might keep her form for running. Robert Mills, from 1923. He was a tracker. Knew these mountains better than anyone. When I wear his skin, I can find hidden springs, secret trails. Very useful. The Monacan shaman who cursed me in 1834. Now there was a fight. He almost won. But in the end, I took his skin too. That's how I learned to change shapes in the first place. Mike and I said nothing. What could we say? I collect them, you see. Each skin teaches me new ways to hunt. The bear gives me strength. The wolf gives me pack instincts. The mountain lion gives me speed. And the humans give me intelligence. As the sun began to set, I realized we had to make a move. We couldn't stay in the tree all night, and the thing seemed perfectly content to wait. Mike, I whispered. When I count to 3, we jump. Different directions. Maybe one of us can get away. Mike nodded. What about you? I've got an idea. But you need to get back to the ranger station. Tell them to burn that cave. Rebecca. 1. The thing at the base of the tree looked up. In the fading light, it had taken human form again. 2. You can't run forever, it called. I have all the time in the world. 3. We jumped. Mike went left, crashing through branches toward a thick stand of pines. I went right, landing hard on rocky ground and rolling down a small slope. Behind me, I heard the thing roar. But it was the roar of a mountain lion, not a bear. It had chosen speed, at overstrength. I ran toward the rocky outcropping where we'd found the cave, my mind racing. In 13 years of studying predator behavior, I'd learned one important thing. Every animal has weaknesses. Even supernatural ones had to follow some kind of rules. The thing caught Mike first. I heard him scream once, then nothing. I forced myself not to look back, not to think about what was happening to him. I had maybe 2 minutes before it came for me. The cave entrance was 50 yards away. I reached my backpack, which we'd left outside when we first went exploring. Inside, I found what I was looking for. Emergency flares, waterproof matches, and a small bottle of camp fuel. The thing appeared at the cave entrance just as I lit the first flare. You think fire will stop me? It asked. It was wearing Mike's face now, but the voice was wrong. Too calm for someone who should be terrified. No, I said, backing toward the deeper part of the cave. But I think it'll stop them. I threw the flare at the nearest animal skin, the wolf pelt we'd found first. It caught fire immediately, burning faster and hotter than normal fur should. The thing wearing Mike's face screamed. It was a sound no human could make, a howl of pain and rage that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. As the wolf skin burned, the thing's left arm began to smoke and blister. The skins, I said, understanding flooding through me. You're connected to them. I lit the second flare and threw it at the mountain lion hide. More screaming. This time the thing's legs buckled, and when it tried to change shape, nothing happened. You can't become what's been destroyed, I said, lighting the third flare. That's when it charged. Even wounded, even bound to human form, it was incredibly fast. It tackled me before I could throw the flare, and we rolled across the cave floor, fighting for control. Its hands were around my throat, squeezing. Mike's familiar face was inches from mine, but the eyes were ancient and full of hate. 150 years, it hissed. 150 years of perfect hunting. You won't end this. I still had the flare in my right hand. With the last of my strength, I pressed it against the bear hide. The thing's grip loosened as the fur caught fire. It staggered back, its form beginning to flicker and blur. Sometimes it looked like Mike, sometimes like the dark-haired man, sometimes like something that wasn't quite human at all. I poured the camp fuel over the remaining skins and lit my last flare. The cave filled with light and heat as the collection burned. The thing that had worn so many shapes screamed and writhed, its form shifting rapidly between different animals, different people, as if it couldn't decide what it was anymore. Finally, it collapsed into its original shape, a withered, ancient man with skin like old leather and eyes like holes in the world. "Please," it whispered. "I just wanted to hunt. I just wanted to be strong." Then the flames reached the human clothes, and it crumbled into dust. I stumbled out of the burning cave and didn't stop running until I reached the ranger station 12 hours later. They found Mike's body the next morning, along with the remains of Sarah Chen and 6 other missing hikers dating back 20 years. The official report blamed the deaths on a rogue bear, later killed in a cave fire. The cave entrance was sealed with concrete for public safety. I left the Park Service 3 months later. I teach folklore now at a small college in Tennessee, specializing in Native American legends. My colleagues think it's an odd career change for someone with my background, but I tell them I developed an interest in cultural mythology. The truth is simpler. I believe the stories now. Last year, a colleague sent me a newspaper clipping from Montana. 3 hikers found dead, showing bite patterns from multiple predator species. Local rangers are baffled by tracks that seem to change from animal to animal. I've started keeping a file of similar incidents: Colorado, 1987, New Mexico, 1993, North Carolina, 2001. Always the same pattern: impossible kills, changing tracks, and caves with warm animal skins. My grandmother was right about the old stories, but she never told me the most important part. There's more than one skinwalker out there, and they're still hunting. I keep emergency flares in my car now, and I never camp alone. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the thing in the cave really died, or if it just learned to be more careful. Either way, I know one thing for certain. Some hungers are so old and so deep that they change us into predators we never imagined we could become. The next time you're hiking in the deep woods and everything goes quiet, every bird, every insect, every small animal, don't stand still and listen. Run. And whatever you do, don't look back at what's following you, because it might be wearing the face of someone you know. My name is Jacob Whitethorn, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. I've pulled 47 people out of caves, fought forest fires that could melt your boots, and tracked lost hikers through blizzards that would freeze a bear solid. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at a man. I was wrong. It was late November 1973 when everything changed. The first snow had just hit, and the temperature was dropping to near freezing every night. Fog rolled through the valleys like ghostly fingers, and the mountains felt different somehow, quieter, like they were holding their breath. I grew up in these hills, third-generation Appalachian. My grandfather used to tell stories about the hollow folk, empty people who lived in the deep caves and stole the breath from sleeping children. He'd speak in Cherokee sometimes, words I didn't understand, but that made my skin crawl. I always figured it was just mountain superstition, the kind of tales old-timers tell to keep kids from wandering off. My specialty was backcountry search and rescue, especially cave systems. I knew every tunnel, every drop, every tight squeeze in a 100-mile radius. The limestone caves under Black Ridge Mountain were some of the deepest and most dangerous. That's why when 3 experienced cavers went missing in the Black Ridge system, they called me. The missing cavers were good people. Jim Morrison, a geology professor from the university, his graduate student Sarah Chen, and local caver Pete Williams. They'd been exploring unmapped passages in the lower chambers. Should have been back 2 days ago. I remember the morning I got the call. The radio crackled to life in my cabin just after dawn. "Jacob, we need you at Black Ridge. Got some folks overdue from a cave run." My partner Tommy Briggs met me at the trailhead. Tommy was younger than me, only been TUS, on the job 5 years, but he was solid, good with ropes, kept his head in tight spots. "What do we know?" I asked, checking my gear one more time. Their trucks still parked here. Found their surface camp intact. No signs of trouble topside. Tommy looked worried. But Jacob, there's something else. The locals won't come near this place anymore. Old Bill Jackson was supposed to guide us up, but he took one look at the mountain and drove off. That should have been my first warning. The hike to the cave mouth took us 2 hours through thick rhododendron and over rocky ridges. The trail was familiar, but something felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, not even the buzz of late-season insects, just the crunch of our boots on frost-covered leaves. When we reached the cave entrance, we found their equipment laid out neat as you please. Helmets, extra rope, backup lights, everything a smart caver brings. But no signs of struggle, no notes, nothing to explain where they'd gone. The cave mouth yawned open like a hungry throat. I'd been in this system dozens of times, but today it felt different. Colder. The usual musty cave smell was there, but underneath it was something else. Something that reminded me of my grandfather's warnings. Standard cave rescue protocol, I told Tommy. We go in together, follow the main passage, mark our route. If we find them alive, we stabilize on site and call for backup. Tommy nodded and checked his gear one more time. We switched on our headlamps and stepped into the darkness. The cave swallowed us whole. Our lights carved tunnels through the blackness, but somehow the beams seemed dimmer than usual. I'd been using the same equipment for years. I knew how bright those lights should be. The main passage sloped down at a steady angle, wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side. Water dripped somewhere. In the darkness ahead, each drop echoing like a gunshot. Our breathing seemed unnaturally loud. Radio check, I said, clicking on my handheld. Static. Pure white noise. We weren't that deep yet. Radios should work fine this close to the entrance. Probably just the weather, Tommy said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We followed the passage for maybe half a mile before we found the first sign of the missing cavers. Scratches on the cave wall. Fresh ones, made by fingernails. Human fingernails. I knelt down and examined them by flashlight. The scratches went deep into the limestone, deeper than fingernails should be able to go. They pointed down the passage toward the unmapped sections. They were clawing at the walls, Tommy said. Why would they do that? Maybe they were lost, panicking, I said, but I didn't believe it. These weren't random scratches. They were purposeful, like arrows pointing the way. The temperature dropped as we went deeper. I'm talking about a 20-degree drop in the span of 50 yards. Our breath started coming out in visible puffs. Cave systems usually maintain steady temperatures year-round. This was impossible. Then we heard it, a sound like wind through hollow bones coming from somewhere ahead in the darkness. But there was no wind down here, no air movement at all. Tommy grabbed my arm. Jacob, look at your compass. I looked down at the compass clipped to my vest. The needle was spinning wildly, never settling on any direction. In my 19 years of cave work, I'd never seen anything like it. Equipment failure, I said, trying to sound confident. Could be mineral deposits, magnetic interference. But I was starting to remember my grandfather's stories. The Cherokee had avoided certain caves, said they were homes to spirits that could steal a man's soul through his breath. I'd always figured it was just old superstition. We followed the scratches deeper into the system, past the last mapped passages into territory I'd never explored. The walls closed in around us, then opened up again into a cease. Hamber I didn't know existed. That's where we found Jim Morrison. He was sitting upright against the far wall, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. His chest rose and fell in steady breaths. But when I knelt beside him and checked for a pulse, I couldn't find one. Jim? Jim? Can you hear me? I shook his shoulder gently. No response. His eyes didn't track, didn't blink. He just sat there, breathing with no heartbeat, like a broken machine that didn't know it was supposed to stop. Tommy checked his neck, his wrist, listened to his chest. Jacob, this is impossible. He's breathing, but there's no pulse. His skin is warm, but... Tommy's voice trailed off. I followed Tommy's gaze and saw what had shocked him into silence. Jim Morrison's shadow on the cave wall didn't match his position. His body was sitting upright, but his shadow appeared to be lying flat, arms spread wide. "We need to get him out of here," I said. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew we had a bigger problem. The scratches on the walls continued past where we found Jim, leading deeper into the cave system. Sarah and Pete were still missing, and if they were in the same condition as Jim, we'd need help to get all three out. But when I tried the radio again, all I got was that hollow wind sound, like voices whispering in a language I couldn't understand. That's when I noticed our lights were getting dimmer. Not the batteries dying. I'd changed them that morning. The darkness was getting thicker, pushing back against our beams like something alive. And somewhere in that darkness, something was breathing back at us. We had to leave Jim where we found him and press deeper into the cave. Every instinct I had was screaming to turn around, to get out while we still could, but two people were still missing. I'd never left anyone behind in 19 years, and I wasn't about to start. The scratches led us through passages that weren't on any map, tight squeezes that opened into vast chambers, winding tunnels that seemed to go on forever. The temperature kept dropping, and our lights kept getting dimmer. Then we found the feeding ground. It was a chamber the size of a small church, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadows our lights couldn't reach. And scattered around the floor like broken dolls were 12 people. I recognized some of them. Old Pete Hawkins, who'd gone missing while hunting 3 years ago. The Martinez family, Maria, Carlos, and their teenage daughter, who'd vanished from their campsite 2 summers back. Others I didn't know, but they all had the same look as Jim Morrison. Eyes open, breathing steady, no pulse, shadows that didn't match their bodies. "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered. "Jacob, what is this place?" I didn't have an answer. I knelt beside Maria Martinez and checked her pulse. Nothing. But her skin was warm, and she was breathing in the same steady rhythm as all the others. That's when I saw Sarah Chen. She was curled up in the corner like she was sleeping, but her eyes were wide open and staring. I crawled over to her, and she grabbed my wrist with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone without a heartbeat. "Don't let them take," she whispered, her voice like autumn leaves scraping across stone. "Sarah, what happened? Where's Pete?" But she just kept staring and repeating the same words. "Don't let them take. Don't let them take." Tommy found Pete Williams on the other side of the chamber. Same condition. Breathing, but no pulse. Empty stare. Shadow pointing the wrong direction. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," I said, but my voice was shaking. "Some kind of gas leak, maybe. Carbon monoxide can cause hallucinations, make people act strange." Even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. Gas leaks don't make shadows move independently. They don't drain the power from flashlights or make compasses spin like tops. That's when Tommy started acting strange. He was standing in the center of the chamber, turning slowly in a circle, his flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. But his movements were getting slower, more mechanical. "Tommy, we need to move. We need to get some of these people out of here." He didn't respond, just kept turning, slower and slower, like a music box winding down. I grabbed his shoulder, and his skin was cold as winter stone. When I looked into his eyes, they had the same empty stare as all the others. "Tommy? Tommy, talk to me." He opened his mouth like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out, just a faint whistle of air, like wind through a crack in the wall. That's when I saw them. They came out of the shadows like smoke given form. Human-shaped but wrong, too tall and too thin, with fingers that stretched like tree branches. Their eyes were white as bone, and when they moved, they didn't walk so much as flow. There were dozens of them, filling the chamber like a congregation of nightmares. And they were all looking at me. One of them moved closer, and I could see that it wasn't quite solid. I could make out the cave wall through its chest, but it cast a shadow as dark as midnight. When it reached toward Tommy, its fingers passed right through his shirt and touched his chest. Tommy's eyes rolled back in his head, and that faint whistle became a steady stream of air flowing out of his mouth and into the creature's fingers. I understood then what I was seeing. These things, the hollow folk from my grandfather's stories, they fed on breath, on life itself. They kept their victims alive but empty, breathing without hearts, living without souls. And they'd been using this cave as a hunting ground for decades. The creature turned toward me, and I saw my death in those white eyes. But as it reached for me, I heard my grandfather's voice in my memory speaking those Cherokee words I'd never understood. Without thinking, I spoke them aloud. The creature recoiled like I'd hit it with fire. The Cherokee words came out of my mouth like they'd been waiting there for 41 years, just waiting for this moment. I didn't know what they meant, but I could feel their power buzzing on my tongue like electricity. The hollow folk drew back, their white eyes narrowing to slits. The one that had been feeding on Tommy let go, and my partner collapsed to his knees, gasping like a drowning man. "Jacob," he wheezed. Can't breathe right. Something's wrong with me." I could see what was wrong. Tommy's shadow was starting to fade around the edges, becoming transparent. Whatever these things had taken from him, he needed it back. The creatures circled us like wolves, staying just outside the reach of whatever protection the old words provided. I realized they were herding us toward the back of the chamber, away from the passage we'd come through. In the deeper shadows, I could see more of them, dozens more. Some still had hints of human features, the hollow folk who used to be people like Pete Hawkins and the Martinez family. Others were older, their human shapes worn away by time, until they were just darkness with eyes. "Grandfather," I whispered, "if you can hear me, I need more than just words." As if in answer, I remembered something else. My grandfather always carried a small leather pouch of tobacco, blessed by the Cherokee medicine man. He told me once that some plants were sacred, that they could protect against evil spirits. I didn't have blessed tobacco, but I had something else. In my emergency kit, I always carried a small bag of loose tobacco, not for smoking, but for trading with locals who might help in a rescue. Mountain people respected the old customs. I pulled out the tobacco and scattered a handful on the ground around Tommy and me. The hollow folk hissed and drew back further, but they didn't leave. They just waited, patient as stone. "It won't hold them long," I said to Tommy. "We need to get out of here." "What about the others?" Tommy pointed to the dozen people sitting around the chamber like empty shells. I looked at Maria Martinez, at old Pete Hawkins, at all the others who'd been feeding these creatures for years. They were alive, but were they still human? Could we save them, or would we just be carrying walking corpses back to the surface? "We can't help them," I said, and the words tasted like ashes. Whatever these things took from them, it's been gone too long. One of the creatures spoke then, its voice like wind through a graveyard. "Join them, Ranger. Feed us willingly, and the emptiness won't hurt." "Go to hell," I said, and scattered more tobacco. But I could feel the protection weakening. The old words were losing their power, and there wasn't enough tobacco to keep us safe much longer. We had maybe 5 minutes before the hollow folk would be able to reach us again. I looked around the chamber trying to find another way out. The passage we'd come through was blocked by at least a dozen creatures. But in the far wall, I could see what looked like a crack, maybe wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Tommy, can you move?" He nodded, but I could see the effort it cost him. Whatever the creature had drained from him had left him weak as a newborn. "There's a crack in the back wall. Might lead to another passage, maybe even another entrance." I helped him to his feet. "We're going to run for it. Stay close to me, and whatever happens, don't stop moving." The hollow folk sensed what we were planning. They started pressing closer, testing the edges of the tobacco circle. A few more minutes and they'd be able to reach us. I spoke the Cherokee words again, louder this time, putting all my will behind them. The creatures flinched back, giving us a narrow path to the crack in the wall. "Now!" I grabbed Tommy's arm and we ran. The hollow folk poured after us like spilled ink. Their fingers reached through the air, grasping for our breath, our warmth, our souls. I felt something cold touch the back of my neck, and for a moment the world went gray around the edges. But we made it to the crack in the wall, I shoved Tommy through first, then squeezed in after him just as the creatures reached us. Fingers like ice pressed against my back, and I felt something essential starting to drain away. Then we were through, stumbling into another passage, this one sloping upward toward what I hoped was daylight. Behind us, the hollow folk howled like winter wind, a sound full of hunger and endless patient rage. We ran through darkness toward whatever lay ahead. The passage led upward for what felt like hours. Tommy could barely walk, leaning on me for support, his breathing shallow and wrong. Every few minutes he'd stop and stare at nothing, and I'd have to shake him back to awareness. "Stay with me, Tommy. Don't let them pull you back." We finally saw daylight, real daylight, filtering down through a crack in the ceiling. It was a different entrance, maybe half a mile from where we'd gone into the cave. I boosted Tommy up first, then hauled myself out into the cold mountain air. The sun was setting, painting the sky red as blood. We'd been underground for 8 hours, though it felt like days. I looked back at the crack we'd emerged from and saw something that made my blood freeze. Dozens of white eyes stared up at us from the darkness below, waiting, patient as the stone itself. I grabbed rocks and dirt, filling in the crack as best I could. It wouldn't stop them permanently, but it might slow them down. Tommy collapsed against a tree, and I got my first good look at him in natural light. His hair had gone completely white. His skin was pale and thin, like paper. When he looked at me, his eyes held depths they'd never had before. Old depths, like he'd seen too much. "Jacob," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can still feel them pulling at me, like they left hooks in my soul." I helped him back to the main trail, and we made it to my truck just as full darkness fell. The drive down the mountain was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every shadow looked like reaching fingers. Every sound outside the truck could have been hollow folk following us home. At the hospital, they couldn't explain Tommy's condition. His heart was beating, but weak and irregular. His blood pressure was dangerously low. The doctors said it looked like severe blood loss, but he hadn't lost a drop. "It's like something drained the life right out of him," one doctor told me. "I've never seen anything like it." Tommy lived, but he was never the same. He quit the Park Service 3 weeks later and moved back east to live with his sister. Before he left, he told me something I'll never forget. "They're still there, Jacob, waiting in the deep places, and they remember us now." I filed my report the next day. 3 cavers lost in unstable cave system. Rescue attempts unsuccessful. Recommended permanent closure due to dangerous conditions. The Park Service sealed the main entrance to Black Ridge Cave with concrete and steel. They put up warning signs and fencing, but I knew it wouldn't matter. There were dozens of ways into those caves, cracks and passages that no amount of concrete could seal. I turned in my resignation that same week. For the past year, I've been studying Cherokee history and folklore, learning the old language, talking to medicine men who still remember the old ways. My grandfather's stories weren't superstition. They were warnings passed down through generations. The hollow folk have been feeding in these mountains since before the first Cherokee settlements. They're patient creatures, content to take a hiker here, a caver there, anyone foolish enough to venture into their feeding grounds alone. Last month, I heard about 3 more people who went missing in the hills near Black Ridge. Search teams found their equipment. Not laid out neat as you please, but no sign of the people themselves. The hollow men are still hungry. If you're reading this, if you're planning to explore caves in the Great Smokies, remember one thing. Some places are empty for a reason. The Cherokee knew to stay away from certain mountains, certain caves. They left offerings of tobacco and sage, spoke the old words of protection, but we forgot their warnings. We forgot that some hungers are older than human civilization, and they're endlessly patient. The mountains remember, even if we don't. And in the deep places, in the caves that don't appear on any map, the hollow folk are still waiting for the next lost soul to wander into their feeding ground. My name is Jacob Whitethorn, and I've told you the truth as I lived it. Take it as warning or dismiss it as the ravings of a broken man. But if you hear the wind whistling through hollow bones, if your flashlight beam seems dimmer than it should be, if you find yourself in a place where the shadows don't match the light, run and don't look back.